Any questions about practice? Please.
Why does it always seem so much easier to practice in here than at home?
Why does it seem easier to practice in here than at home? I don't know. What do you think? Peer pressure is one thing. I think it maybe in part actively reminds us that we're not alone in the human condition, and Sangha community is kind of one of the pillars of this practice. It's not really, there's a place for solitude and self-reliance, and if we try to do too much of this in isolation, things can get weird. Yeah. Yeah.
When you did your solitary practice, did things get weird?
When I did my solo retreat practice, did things get weird? I like that, putting me right on the spot. I did spend a month basically in a room practicing alone, and they didn't get weird this time, but they've gotten weird before. Yeah, actually the structure of the way the forest refuge is set up at IMS, which is like a self-retreat. It's not like a cohort. We all go for 1 week or 1 month and we practice together. It's people who are choosing their own times to sit, and so people are coming and going quite regularly. So I was there for November, but almost everybody that I started with was gone by the end, and some people had come and gone, and some people are there for many months at a time. And actually what I noticed was the actual a real absence of the sense of Sangha and the sort of sense of solidarity with a group that you're doing something together with. And that was a very kind of conspicuous absence for me. I didn't feel completely disconnected from other people practicing, and there was some sense of community, but it was so much thinner than when you're all coming back to the hall. You all know this is day 5, you all know you're leaving, it's different. And it actually, I think there was a much less sense of support from the community. Like the motivation had to come from within. And here and at normal kind of retreats, there's a lot of support just in seeing others suffering and seeing others happy and seeing just the same faces, and it's beautiful. Okay, I'm ready for another personal question. Yeah.
So somebody from the intro.
Yeah.
Letting go feels very difficult around family.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that?
Oh. Yeah, the line is Noah's dad, Stephen Levine, said, family pushes our buttons because they installed them. That's not the end of my answer, but hang on. I did metta practice for my parents, actually, for a substantial portion of the time. I was in retreat, and then they came and picked me up from retreat. So I had like a good 48 hours of time to like really see what progress was or was not made. The habits, what I see, the habits in family are so deep, we have to like get ahead of them before we get too far down the rabbit hole into reactivity, It's like the way that emotion kind of accelerates from feeling like at baseline to like a little agitated to losing it in some way, like the move from a bit agitated to losing it, that space seems to collapse with our closest people, right? And so I mean, something that I do focus on is sort of the level of like emotional idling, like being pretty precise about where I am moment by moment, and just noticing when that kind of emotional idle point is like, I literally think about it like RPMs in a car engine, and normally like a healthy idle is like 700 RPMs or something like that. With family, the idle point, it's just like higher. And so I really try to actually pay close attention to that. There are kind of, actually tonight I'll talk a little bit about this. There are some certain, we're not going to be able to remember much in the intensity of reactivity, but I try to remember just a couple things, and I try to remember those things on the basis of the ways I've caused suffering. And they're very, I will talk about this later, it's very specific little miniature pep talks we have to give ourselves to like call ourselves back into balance. Maybe the last thing I'll say is that some interpersonal kind of struggles in the family realm, they actually necessitate taking some action, having some conversation, setting some limit. And our attempt to kind of regulate ourselves in the absence of that concrete action, limit, conversation, whatever it may be, the attempt, like we may be afraid to actually make that gesture. And so we're like, I'll just try to be equanimous, I'll try to be peaceful. But what actually needs to happen, we need to do something. And to ask ourselves to regulate and to manage our own reactivity in the absence of that concrete step is unwise. And sometimes it's like a rationalization of not doing what we intuit we need to do. Yeah, last one.
I'm curious, I guess, about like loneliness or absence. For me, like in my job, it's been kind of interesting over the last couple weeks. Like my boss's wife had a baby, so then he was gone, and then one member of the 4-person team is no longer on the team, and then the remaining third person is leaving on a flight to go out of the country for the next 2.5 weeks, and so now it's like just me. I'm like, my roommate just left. I don't know. It's just like noticing all these people that were like around, like not being around, and noticing like the kind of fear and alarm of like, it's gonna feel a certain way, or it feels a certain way, and I know that I have like the wisdom to like, gather firewood and make a fire for myself and like reach out to people or whatever. But I'm curious about that point where it's like I'm just alarmed about like I'm afraid of a feeling, or I'm kind of like agitated about it, or like afraid of feeling lonely, or alone or something.
And the absences, they don't feel like it's almost a little surprising that it feels like such a loss, or it's not grief. It's just a sense of some looming isolation or something.
I think it's like I kind of, the last 2 weeks was like, okay, I'm gonna be really scrappy and like use all my resources and do this. And then now I feel like, okay, like that's enough, but it's not over yet. I'm starting to feel depleted, like without people around.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. I think actually I had a similar question maybe last Christmas time in this group, and what I said then was that I've been wanting to give a Dharma talk about loneliness for a long time, but don't feel like I know enough. And that was last year. And this year, I think the same answer. I don't feel like I don't feel like I know enough about it to give a really coherent answer. I can see that there are certain kinds of just subtle flavors of loneliness that really propel me into action, into busyness. If there were no sense of loneliness in my life, I think I'd be less busy, and.
Or there's like an urgency, some kind of urgency feeling.
Yeah. I do feel like in terms of our practice more and more does take on the quality of a living, breathing companion. That the Dharma actually, and the sense of a practice, it actually comes to occupy a place where it feels like someone is with us all the time. And that like our path has this kind of very friendly, companion-like quality. And so we come to trust this more and more deeply, and it feels like it's just there more and more for us, even when we're lonely, maybe especially when we're lonely. And so that evolves over time, but as far as specific ways of approaching it, other than I think it is actually great not to try to gut things out and to reach out. And sometimes it's like takes some energy to initiate the action, but it's like we should do it. We should do it. And okay, this is a good Dharma project for me. I will take this into my heart, and maybe I can give a talk on loneliness next Christmas. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so let's say hi to some people. Yeah, don't be shy. And bathrooms, tea. Well, I'll ring the bell in 10 minutes. We'll come back. So I was looking at Norman Fisher's book on compassion, who this weekend I was looking at, and I think he was here and maybe even talked about that. And I wanted to say some words about it. And as I was looking at it, I was realizing, okay, I'm an insight Vipassana insight mindfulness meditation teacher commenting on a book written by a Zen teacher that's commenting on a Tibetan 12th century text. And so we have all three major kind of lineages there represented. And that just feels like it actually warrants a couple words. I don't get too far into the scholastic distinctions between the lineages, and but they're real. There are some differences. I remember going to the it was called the Mahasangha meeting. So it was Western teachers from North America, but really throughout the Western Hemisphere, some monastics, and it was a meeting of all three lineages, like basically Theravadan, Insight, Vipassana, and then Zen and Tibetan, and there are others. I don't want to leave those out, but those are the three main lineages. And I was, one of the youngest people there, and I remember I was in this small group with somebody from a different lineage, and we were sort of like almost wore our lineage like on our, like a badge kind of, like, and I remember I was young and impressionable and trying not to step on anybody's toes, and this teacher who was like fairly senior teacher from an unnamed lineage was so mean to me. And I was just like, and I'm not like super identified as like the Theravadan warrior, and fuck this Tibetan stuff, and that's not, I've been influenced and practiced in all the lineages, but I just was like, whoa, what is going on here, man? Like, happened a couple times actually, and you could really feel the divisions, and it was upsetting to me because that's sort of how normal conferences are, but I didn't think that's how Buddhist teacher conferences would be. And so, it's like we're often letting go, we know to let go, but then we're usually forgetting to let go of something, And sometimes that's our path, right? And it's like, we just actually have to be quite conscious of that. And these distinctions between these lineages, I think, it's been eroded to some extent. Joseph Goldstein, who's primarily a Vipassana teacher, but has spent a lot of time in the Tibetan tradition, wrote a book 10 years ago called One Dharma. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. And in that he asks the question, he says, practice is really an allegiance to a very simple question. What works? What works to free the mind from suffering? What works to engender a heart of compassion? What works to awaken? And that kind of language really cuts through the dividing lines between lineages. And so there's some movements actually where the things are getting fuzzier between the different traditions. And now enter science, where scientists, they don't care if you think you're a Zen practitioner or a mindfulness person or a Tibet, they just don't care at all about those distinctions. They want to know what is truly shared and truly distinct about all of these practices, right? And so it looks on the surface that attending to the breath and metta and Tibetan compassion practices and feeding your demons and all of these things look highly differentiated, right? But at the level of how they impact our bodies, how they interact with their neurobiological impacts, probably a lot of the distinctions that we've drawn are doomed to collapse. And I think that's actually a very good thing. It's often a good thing to see artificial distinctions collapse under close attention. And so it's in that kind of spirit that I think Norman brought his attention to this 12th century beloved Tibetan text. And it's formulated in, the text has 7 main points, but it's really it's 59 what is called, they call slogans. 59 short phrases that comprise these basic instructions for waking up. And they're really designed to be punchy and memorable and to sink into the bones, to be actually a resource for us when it's hard to remember the Dharma. It's like suffering has this very dreamlike quality to it. Dreamlike in the sense that we really forget the Dharma. We feel like cut off from that kind of sense of companionship with this like living entity of practice, of wisdom, of compassion. We just feel so cut off and kind of cordoned off in some corner of our minds. And in those times, it's hard to remember much, you know? Like suffering really does make us forget deeply. And sometimes all we can remember are a few words. All we can remember are a few words that we've trained into our bones. I know I shared this Bruce Lee, who said, under duress we don't rise to our expectations, we fall to our level of training. You know? And with these slogans, we're really trying to like find a way of having them sink into our bones so they're there for us even when we've forgotten the rest of the path. And I was attracted to Norman's book because of my experience that so much of the way the Dharma kind of manifests in my life on a day-to-day basis is in the form of short phrases, little mental notes, you know, just one or two words that actually link me back to balance and sanity, you know. And these kinds of slogans or phrases, notes, they're super personal. They're not the stuff you heard the Dharma teacher say. They're not, or at least not necessarily. And they're not necessarily the stuff you read. They're like these very specific, idiosyncratic little understandings that are relevant for our hearts in some particular way. You know? And something that I notice as people practice over the years, as their Dharma practice evolves, they start to talk in more and more kind of unique and personal ways about practice. Maybe you notice this in yourself, that how you think about the Dharma, how you think about your practice, it's getting more and more particular to you. And even the language, the words we use, it's not like the popular be mindful, let go, you know, be kind. You know, it gets really specific, you know. And it gets, I think, specific because it's like wisdom that's tailored so carefully to the way we suffer. And it's wisdom that cuts through, that punctures some of that dream of suffering. But then the question is, how do these things actually get into the bones? Like how is it there in a way that provides some reliable refuge for us? This probably varies from person to person. But my experience has been that it's been about seeing how I participate and proliferate suffering. Like seeing that in a very clear way, and seeing it with a lot of affect. There's a lot of emotion that's actually we touch into when we're really learning things that are getting into our bones. It's like we're touching into it, insights that are charged with a lot of feeling. You know, it's not like a casual kind of seeing of something. We actually see in a way that does something to the heart. You know, you have some sense of that, yeah. And so a lot of what we're actually doing in our practice, what we're doing in our formal meditation practice, is we're looking and we're trying to look in this steady, deep way, so that we see in. It's like the seeing and the emotion become tied together. And that kind of seeing has some liberatory potential. That can become a refuge. That can become a slogan in a way. And so Fisher's book suggests that we actually like chew on these slogans. This is not so much a book to be read, but something to be chewed on and practiced with. And some of the slogans for me were not particularly impactful. Some of them quite feel relevant, important, close to my heart. The seven points under which the slogans fall. Just share these. Resolve to begin, train in empathy and compassion, transform bad circumstances into the path, make practice your whole life, assess and extend the discipline of relationship, living with ease in a crazy world. And so these are the 7 kinds of categories, and next time I'll actually share some of the slogans, how they fit together perhaps. We don't have time, but I wanted to start with actually the final slogan, which is, don't expect applause. Yeah. After all this, 58 slogans, all this beautiful, heartfelt practice, all the insight, the generation of compassion, don't expect applause, yeah. But it's actually a very nuanced way that he talks about it. It's beautiful. Anyway, so I'll pick up on that, and let's just sit for a moment now. So may the goodness of the Sangha, goodness of individual heart, the goodness of human potential, may this be offered out in all directions. May it be a cause for more joy, kindness, and safety in our lives and the lives of those we touch.